Hello and welcome to the NALEAP Media Summit 2021. My name is Al-Mohamed and I am here for the Vis-Ability on and off-screen Latinx POC Artists with Disabilities panel. My pronouns are she, her, and I am located in Washington, D.C. I'm wearing a purple suit jacket. Yes, I dressed up for you, and I am actually sitting in my office filled with lovely, lovely books and a few of my favorite action figures. I will be your moderator for today. However, when I am not moderating, I am actually a writer and director, documentary filmmaker, currently working with PBS. So with us today, we have Danny Gomez and Kaitlyn Young. And actually, I'm going to pass it off to Danny to intro himself to us first.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Danny J. Gomez. Pronouns are he, him, his. I'm based in Los Angeles, California. I'm currently sitting in my office, aka my room. There's a corner of a bed and a shelf with my TV, and I have side swooping brown hair with a gray and black plaid shirt. I'm an actor, sometimes model. I have been on NBC's New Amsterdam. That was my latest credit in 2020. I was also the recipient of the Christopher Reeves Acting Scholarship that was presented to me at the Media Access Awards. And I'm also working on my own projects to further the disability conversation. It's Danny Gomez. I'm done speaking.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kaitlyn Young. I'm the founder and CEO of the visual effects company, Alpha Studios. I'm also a visual effects supervisor by trade. I co-founded a new disability advocacy nonprofit called 1 in 4. I'm currently working on a new show for Apple TV, slated for this fall. My pronouns are she and her, and I am a Chinese woman. I have shoulder length brown hair with black glasses, and I'm here in my office in Burbank, California, with a few computers behind me.
Fantastic. Welcome, Kaitlyn and Danny. All right, so let's get into it. Before we actually get started too far into the Q&A, I just want to remind folks that the hashtag for the conference is hashtag NALEAP Media Summit 2021. So as Danny and Kaitlyn are dropping some wisdom, feel free to pass it along on the internet. So first up, I think one of the things that would be really good to know is what are some of the primary challenges that you see people of color with disabilities face while they're working, especially in entertainment? And if you can give us a couple of kind of specific examples that have happened to you over and over.
Ladies first.
I think right now we're a little bit of unicorns in the industry, right? Where there's so few of us, and yet, now there's a demand for it. Whereas, say, even a few years ago, these exact reasons why we're getting, the initial interviews and so forth might be the exact reason why we would not even be considered in the first place. So I think this is a good measurement that the tides are turning. And, this is a place to have the conversation about disability in the larger context of diversity conversations. As a woman of color, it is very challenging, I would say, because for my industry, at least visual effects, it is very male dominated. So, even bringing up gender sometimes can be an uncomfortable situation, so sometimes even bringing up gender can be an uncomfortable conversation to be had amongst a room full of men, let alone bring in race and then, disability as well. A very well-known streamer recently told me that I am the only working on-set supervisor, a woman of color there is, at least according to the US, Canada, and Europe. And I think for 2021, that is a astounding statistic to hear, because I thought there would be more of us by now. But I think especially for people with disabilities, oftentimes we're not even 1 of 4, right? 1 in 4 people in America identifies as having a disability, but a lot of times we are 1 of 1 in a lot of settings that we find ourselves to be in.
So I guess I'll go now. uh, as far as the acting side and being a person of color with a disability, I've noticed that our castings aren't ever for a specific disability or specific race, if you will. We're all clumped into the same group. And with that being said, it doesn't allow us to show, our culture. For me being Hispanic, it doesn't allow me to showcase my culture as well as my disability, having a spinal cord injury. I mean, I've gone into castings where they're casting for somebody who's a double amputee, any race. So then you go into a room and there's 30 to 40 people, different looking people, different disabilities that don't even match what the casting notice is asking for. And that just tells me that casting doesn't really know what they're looking for, or B, this is a good thing. They're open to casting someone new that different that they haven't seen. But it's got to be overwhelming for casting to have a group full of different races, different disabilities, different personalities to fit into one role. And then one of the things that I noticed, I was actually thinking about this question. I've never been on a casting for an audition for a role in Spanish. And
wow.
Yeah, never. Not one commercial audition, not one theatrical audition. And I think it reflects on how the Hispanic community views disability. It's when I'm out in public, just in everyday life, I get weird looks from, Hispanic people. Like, why is he in a wheelchair? Like he's so young to be in a wheelchair. It's like stuff that people don't talk about and I guess aren't exposed to in everyday life. So it's challenging as far as casting.
I will say I did go to a casting session just for fun. My agent convinced me to try it out. I went in for a role of a Chinese American woman working in tech, and I was told that I wasn't Chinese enough.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So actually, I think that's a neat point that you kind of brought up, which I'm going to go ahead and just slide on into, because it's related to some of the things we talked about amongst ourselves. It's specific to this panel, right? Normally, you'll see folks talk about disability, or they'll talk about race and ethnicity, and it's like they're two separate things, right? Never mind that. Guess what? People can actually be more than one thing, and some of the complexities that come from that intersection, especially when it comes down to disability and how different communities view it. And I'm really kind of curious to kind of get both of y'all's take on that. And this time I'm actually going to pick on Danny to go first because he made Kaitlyn go first last time. Sorry, that's what happens.
So we're talking about as far as intersectionality?
Right, because you both kind of alluded to a little bit of the idea of that it isn't just about the disability. It's the fact that being disabled and basically being not white is a completely different experience than what I think most people would assume with just disability alone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that goes back to what I said of not being ever sent out an audition in Spanish, because there's a whole Spanish market that I could be going out for. And there's a whole Spanish community that I could be educating. And if they see someone who looks like me, who's in a wheelchair, when they see me out in real life, it's not nothing strange. It's like, we have to normalize disability for every race and every culture, so everybody is comfortable with it. And, this comes down on casting and producers opening their minds to new people and new stories to tell. And it's lacking, and it's really upsetting, because I am Hispanic, and I speak Spanglish. It's not the best, but that's real life. I was American, born in America. My family's from Colombia, and there's a lot of stories like that, and you never see those stories. Like Kaitlyn said, she wasn't Chinese enough. I've been on auditions where I'm not Spanish enough, or I have too much of an accent, or I have not enough of an accent. It's so strange, a strange thing to deal with. So we have to show those real stories, like people who only speak Spanglish, you know?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. I'm just going to poke a little harder here. Where do you think that the issue arises? Is it more on let's say the side that looks at disability, and when they're doing the casting, like, well, when they think about disability, they don't actually think that it involves anybody other than than the traditional mainstream white cis het person with a disability as part of it? Or do you think it's also one of the things when we talk about, like you said, there's a whole Latinx community that's also making films themselves, and then there's a cultural aspect of how does that community look at disability? Like you said, when you go down the street, people stare, whoa, you're too young to be in a wheelchair. Is there that side of it also? We're like, no, we don't know about putting you into a film, because there's the cultural aspect on that side. Because, and I guess that's my question is where do you think it's coming from?
I think it's communities not being educated. For instance, before I had an accident in 2016, and I was in my early 30s when I was injured. So up till that point, I knew nothing about disability. I was completely ignorant to that community and that life. So when I became disabled myself, I had a lot of learning to do. And I learned that there's this beautiful community of talented people that no one ever talks about. And I think that someone has to be brave, write a story, cast a person who doesn't fit your stereotypical, white cis, whatever, disabled person, and put someone like me or Kaitlyn in front of the camera so people can see that, oh yeah, those people do exist.
I can tell you have thoughts, Kaitlyn. I can tell you have thoughts.
First of all, don't ever put me in front of a camera. I don't think I will, give any performance that's close to what Danny can bring to life. I do think, though, this interesting industry that we work in, we're ultimately the export of culture, right? American culture. And I think American culture now is being more broadly defined, with all the other marginalized groups also wanting a voice, to be in the fabric that makes up America. And what's really damaging about not sharing the disability culture is it really affects every aspect of a person, including their imagination, right? I want to ask the people listening to our talk right now, how many of you guys have imagined a disabled person when you're coming up with a story, right? I think because there's such a lack of representation that it doesn't even seep into your imagination that we exist, out here. And especially from a cultural setting, different cultures view disabilities differently. That is actually one of the primary reasons we, became immigrants. I was born in China and we moved to the US, mainly because in China, if you have a physical disability, then you were not given the same rights as everyone else. You didn't have the rights to attend school or look for employment or anything of that nature. And my parents, both being the ambitious doctors that they were, I think they wanted me to be a doctor the second I was born. And they were like, well, how is she going to do that if she can't go to PhD school, or do all the other things? And so that really led us to look for opportunities elsewhere for me to just, be a human in some forms. And I think after, of all the degrees that I have, under my belt, I think it is a loss, for a country like China to dismiss people like me right off the bat, because of a condition that I was born with that I had no control over. But I also get that for a country that vast, with many, class and like divides, and right, because I mainly grew up in the rural parts of China where we didn't have street signs. Our directions were, hey, turn left when you see this pose, and then keep going and turn right until you see this field. It is really hard to advocate for disability awareness and accessibility, at a place like that. I totally understand. But I don't think we have the similar excuses in Hollywood. I think it's really about a lack of understanding and awareness, for us to be included, even in the background of shows, right? How many times have we seen disabled people, in the backgrounds, right? Going in and out of cafes, right? It's not to say we never drink coffee. It's just to say that, we never get even casted for background roles that we eventually became, will become invisible in the very field that we work in.
You're right. And as far as background casting. I did it. I don't think I'll do it again. But when I was on set, they put me so far in the back that I probably was just like a little speck of a wheel, and I mean, that's exactly, what you say. It's like they never put us up front.
It's almost this juxtaposition, right? Because when we go out, we get so many eyeballs, unwanted eyeballs on us. But yet, on the screens where we do want, the eyeballs, that's where we want to direct our eyes and our attentions. We're nowhere to be found.
Absolutely. And I always wonder, I think part of that idea is maybe folks are taught this idea that if you include something like race or ethnicity or disability, you have to have a reason to include it in the story. And what other reason? I mean, what's wrong with just simply saying we exist, right? We can be in the story because we're here. And so I think that's one of those frustrations. And clearly you are both super passionate about this. And I know you've done lots of talking in your community, things like that. And I'm wondering if you could share what are some of the artistic choices and things that you have made to kind of help drive this greater inclusion of people with disabilities? And this time I get to pick on Kaitlyn first because I picked on Danny last time.
So with all the films that we, so with all the films that's kind of in our, lexicon right now, right? I often think of Forrest Gump and, maybe Mad Max and other contemporary films that feature people with disabilities. And so working in the field of visual effects, this is where I really do put my foot down. I will not remove any limbs because you can make that choice in casting, right? Although it is possible with visual effects, and that's how it has always been done with the visual effects, as the only wheelchair user working in this industry of largely, that's largely male dominated. This is one area where I don't feel comfortable doing this kind of work. And this is where I'm really fighting for authentic representation. Yeah.
Right. I got to ask. So what has been some of the responses when you've said that?
They'll just go to a different vendor, which I get it, and they have every right to do that, right? But hopefully, in that very moment that I share a piece of myself that, can let them, make a different choice down the line. Awesome.
Yeah. And I think it's a tough thing, because when you say it is a question of someone's career, right? It's your career and you're making that decision. And I know for a lot of folks, it's a scary thing to stand up and say, I don't want to do that. So I applaud that. So I think that's a great point.
Because I think if I don't make a point about that, the more times we see the more times we see non-disabled people portraying disabled people, you're further erasing disabled people. And I can't do that, right, to my own community. So I'd rather lose a client any day.
Absolutely. How about you, Danny?
Well, going off of a few things you both said, the casting of non-disabled people in disabled roles is like, it's still happening. And it used to never bother me because I didn't understand the position that I was in. But now it's like, it really infuriates me because I hear excuses like, we didn't have time for casting. We don't know where they are. There's so many, you can just, YouTube disabled actors and the Disability Film Challenge from Easter Seals will come up, and there's hundreds of people with disabilities acting and writing and directing and producing. So
we're not hiding under rocks anywhere,
Yeah, exactly. We're not like hidden gems that you got to lift a stone and we pop out like, here I am. But it's the excuses. Like you said, Day, why do we have to explain why the person is in a wheelchair? Like if they're just rolling into the cafe. And I've heard that excuse before where they're like, well, if let's say you roll into the scene, people are going to wonder how'd you end up in the wheelchair? And it's going to take away from the story. And I'm like, people are not dumb. Like they know this is a CSI type show. They don't care about if I'm in the background getting a coffee. Like it's not going to take away from the story. So for my artistic choices I always say, I've always been told that, people don't want to hear the story of like how disability affects a person and why they became disabled. Now, it kind of goes against what I just said, but I've never seen a story told about somebody with a spinal cord injury. And that's what I suffered. It was a spinal cord injury. And after my injury, after my accident, there was nothing that I could watch on TV that I could relate to, that I could learn from, that I could grow from. And there's, spinal cord injuries happen every day. I don't know the numbers there, but they're staggering. And if I had a story to lean on, it would have helped me tremendously in those months afterwards, because I was suffering. I felt alone. So I created a show that kind of loosely based on my life that is really upfront in your face, and it shows the hardships of living with spinal cord injury and how it affects everyone around you. And I've been trying to shop that around for a while. The interest has been here and there, but I think it's a story that needs to be, and this goes for any disability and any person dealing with a disability and an injury, or even being born with it, because you don't see that enough.
Yeah, it's that idea of seeing yourself, on the screen, seeing yourself in the industry, right? So it's not just a bunch of guys in the room with you, and it's also it's seeing yourself as part of disability, but it's also seeing yourself as people of color as well, because again, that's another thing. Once you get to a certain point, you don't see anybody else that looks like you in the room, and you're talking about the choices that you guys have made, right, to deal with careers and the things that have been problematic and the things that you battle against. So one of the things I'm actually kind of curious about is Hollywood's response to that, right? I know there's been some changes and some calls for authentic casting and calls for more artists with disabilities above the line and below the line. But I think I'm just kind of curious on, we hear the talk about it. What can you guys tell me about what's the real deal here? Yeah. See, this is real talk right here on this panel. And for those of you who are listening, I have to say again, when these folks are dropping wisdom, don't forget the hashtag. So it's hashtag NALEAP Media Summit 2021. So, but back to the question, who would like to take it first?
I will take this one.
All right.
So Danny and I both have the privilege to work with Gail Williamson, who she is so many things, but she has done so much in her career of disability advocacy, education, acceptance, understanding, all the good stuff, right? She is at the forefront of that, really. And one of my favorite quotes from her is, her work is done the day that she doesn't have a job anymore, as a disability advocate. And so I do think there are lots of talk right now. But I will say in 2021, if we're just having the conversation, you're about 4 years late to the game. Just putting that out there, But if there's only talk right now and not translating to action, we're translating to things that we can actually see on the screen, I don't think the work has been done in a way that is serving the diversity initiatives that all these studios and streamers are aiming for right now. I still don't see myself, and on the rare case, right, I'll be like, oh, I see someone for 3 seconds. Hey, all right, representation for 3 seconds in the background. Yes, right. It's not nearly enough where it's even common knowledge that people with disabilities can act and can produce and can write and can visual effects supervise. And until we get to a point where, it feels redundant, we haven't done it. Yet.
Yeah, I feel well said. I feel like Hollywood will try to do something and they will succeed in it, and then they'll take 2 steps back. And Netflix is so good at, they're putting out new content with stories with people with disabilities and putting them as leads. Some of the leads don't have the disability, but at least they're trying to tell the stories. And then I'll see a movie on there where one of the characters is deaf, but they cast a non-able person, and the part wasn't even that big, and they had stars surrounding them. They can't use the excuse that we needed a star name for this one role, because we all know there's so many talented deaf actresses and actors in Hollywood. But then Hollywood will come out with something like A Quiet Place, where they put Millicent Simmons and made her in the second one the focal point of the story. So it gets people talking like, wow, this little girl, a deaf little girl carried this whole film. Like, wow, people with disabilities can do that? Like, maybe we should try it in our film. So let's keep up that momentum. But then it takes two steps back with the Oscars and not giving Crip Camp the documentary award that they should have received. And we could have seen that ramp used and people with wheelchairs going onto stage in front of millions of people, and it would have changed everything. Maybe little, but it's they got to keep the momentum and stop taking the steps back.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know a lot of people have some pretty strong feelings about that octopus. So I'm actually kind of curious about that in particular, what you guys have been seeing. Like, I have to admit, I see phrases thrown around like inclusion riders and diversity statements and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know Amazon came out with theirs. I know National Geographic put out a note to some of the producers they work with. And I know other studios and production companies have been saying, we're going to do this. And they've had their little statements that you see in the press. And I'm kind of curious about, has that had an impact? Have you seen anything that's come from that, or are those any good?
I personally haven't yet. And so our mantra in 1 and 4 is add the A for accessibility, become DEIA, and not necessarily talking about accessibility in terms of casting, right? Making sure, above the line, below the line, but also about closed captioning, audio description. We are shipping out a product, and we would like as many people in the world to experience this product and enjoy it in a way that was intended. So adding the A really should carry, not only all the way through the end credits, but all the way through the production pipelines as well. And I haven't seen anyone who has done extensive literature about how to include disability every step along the way. I do think right now the spotlight is on actors, right? Which from what Danny's saying too, right? It hasn't, been kind of fully fulfilled yet. So I think it'll take some time, to move into the other aspects too. But I just want to say, like, what a missed opportunity, because there's so many of us, and this is disability, right? Anyone can acquire disability, and from an accident or an illness. It could be temporary, it could be permanent, and yet there's no authentic shows to show about that. And, we have a lot of purchasing powers as well. We can influence our family and our friends of like, hey, you should see this. Hey, you should purchase this. Hey, you should rent this. And because, we don't see ourselves represented enough, we are not able to make those purchasing, choices authentically, because, we all want to see ourselves represented somewhere. And so right now, that's the market that is wide open.
Yeah, honestly, before that question came up, I didn't even know that was going on. The inclusion riders for people with disabilities and stuff like that. I knew it was going on for race and gender, but just like with any other thing, when people talk about inclusion in the industry, disability is never mentioned. And there was a time, like the beginning of 2020 started off pretty busy for me, like a lot of castings for disabled roles, and it was exciting, but it's usually the roles that are written. It's always it falls into like a few boxes, like the depressed disabled person who wants to end their life, or the super inspirational, or there's another one, but it's never just like, hey, there's a guy who owns a coffee shop, and he's like the best friend of the main character, or is the main character. Like, I've never been the love interest or the lead, and that's stuff that I want to change, and that I hope will change. And I think it will, slowly but surely we'll get there. And I have a feeling that it's going to be like a fad, like these fads in Hollywood, a year of like tornado movies and stuff like that. It's going to be like a year of disabled movies, and it's going to be the cool thing to have like a disabled friend, and hopefully that leads to something bigger and better, and educates more people. But as of right now, it's been really slow the past few weeks. And, you know, the thing I do like, though, that I just submitted a voiceover audition today. And it was cool because the breakdown said the producer's open to any gender, disability, race. And I thought it was cool that it was voiceover because we don't even see the person. So it shows that it's not important for them that, you know, the person has a disability or not. It's about the talent. So they're actually just letting us show what we got. So I think we're moving in a positive direction, but there's still change to do.
I don't think there's any question. And yeah, I think it is a big issue. When everyone talks about diversity, do they include disability? And then, like we talked about previously, when you're talking about disability, are you looking at how disability intersects with these other kinds of identities? And it becomes step by step by step. And I think that's, you know, we're talking about the, you know, what are some of these industry players doing, and is that going to make a difference? And I guess maybe that next step, you know, that next question that kind of comes from that, which is, you know, hey, we're here, you're on a panel, you've got an audience right here, you've got a mix of filmmakers and industry folks, and you know, they're imprisoned by the screen right now. So what are the things you would tell them? What are like concrete like steps or actions or things? You know, I know, Danny, one of the things you talk about is like when you're getting scripts already, it's putting disability into a box. So clearly that's advice for writers right there. So I'm just kind of curious about what are some of the different things that you would actually recommend to folks listening to actually do something about this.
I think some advice for new filmmakers, writers is educate yourself on different topics. If you're interested in disability, go on YouTube and look at all the cool stuff that people with disabilities are doing. I mean, we're performing in wheelchair racing in the Olympics. You know, there's wheelchair sports from, you know, the rugby, the skate park stuff. You know, we're doing amazing things. So there's more amazing stories than just being depressed or, you know, the super inspirational or, you know, whatever. But I think you have to give these new stories an opportunity, because I have auditioned for some really cool roles where it has, you know, it's about the disability, but the person is flawed and they're living a real life and they're having problems in their marriage. And it's like, it's great to see that type of story. But that being said, I haven't seen these shows being made. You know, I'm auditioning for these and, you know, I'm not getting them, but is it because they're not moving forward in production? Like, we have to give these shows a chance and show that people will have, you know, a taste to see those types of stories.
Can you rephrase the question again?
Sure. I think part of it is we've talked about what you've done to push disability inclusion forward. We talked about what Hollywood's been trying to do with their statements and their writers, and I think this next step is okay. We with the folks here who are in the audience, right? So we've got our writers, we've got our filmmakers, we've got all the folks following this. You know, these are Naleep's people, right? What would you tell them to help kind of to join you to help with this kind of effort? What are the specific things that you can think of you could ask them to do?
Yeah, so I think disability is very interesting because you cannot be just disabled. You're always disabled and something else. You can pick whatever that thing is. You can pick many things. You can pick few things, but disability does not exist in a vacuum, right? So that's where the intersectionality really comes in, that you can play with, different races and backgrounds and, sexual orientations and gender and all the other stories that, if you're looking for a story that's not a sequel or prequel or repeat of any kind, this is the best place to start because we haven't had enough stories to have a repeat of anything yet, right? And I also encourage people to really educate yourselves about disability. We have some great bite-sized resources on our website, which is 1in4coalition.org, like the number 1 in 4, the number 4 coalition.org. And we kind of tailored it to as as much time as little time as you have. If you have very little time, we have curated a playlist of TED Talks featuring disabled artists doing all kinds of amazing things in the world. We have books, we have movies, we have checklists, right? If you're a little bit further on productions and you're wondering, hey, how can I rent a trailer that's accessible? How can I rent a bathroom that's accessible? Where do we find interpreters, right? Our website, hopefully is a jumping off point, right, to help you in your research. But I think it's from my, many, engagements with others talking about disability and advocating and educating, I do see it is much easier to have the conversation when someone had someone in their life who had a disability, or they had a temporary disability of some kind on their own, right? So I think maybe this is a metric to show like, hey, maybe you haven't had enough experiences, right, to still using outdated stereotypes. And now it's a really good time to educate yourself and, and see what new voices that you can add in addition to including disability.
So I have a question in particular for you. Do you think it is significantly different since your expertise is effects, so it's more, behind the scenes type of work? Do you think it makes a difference doing that versus, let's say, the casting and being in front of the camera?
I don't think so. I think you need a diverse mind, right, for every aspect, right? I always use this example. If you're going to a picnic, don't let everyone bring cups. If everyone shows up with cups, it's going to have a very boring party, right? So you want to have different people bring up, different things as well. For me, because I think so much of my life is planned very strategically. Like right now, I'm working in Burbank. There is a gas station, that's a mile down the street that I know that they can have someone come out and help me pump gas between the hours of like 9 to 8, so then I have to make sure that if I'm on empty, then I have to make sure I get my fill before I go home and so forth. And those kind of order of operations are extremely useful for visual effects. Like, hey, we have to do this first. So this can become a look dev for this thing. But then if we do this first, then we have to do more look dev on both of them. And we're not killing two birds with one stone. These kind of thinking are really useful for different aspects of different industries. And so when we're not in the room, then you're not getting, these nuggets that you otherwise could have.
I like it. So just to sum up what you were saying, because I think we started with, we're talking about educate yourself, right? It is not hard. You can find folks on the internet, just look for it and you'll see some new and different stories that maybe break the stereotypes. And two, I think kind of what you're saying is just hire folks, just flat out hire them. It's added, flexibility and depth and experiences to your team. And the more you have that variety of thinking, the more solutions you have available to whatever problem arises, with your production. So I think that is like super, super valuable. So here's some things I'm kind of curious about, right? Because we've been talking a lot about the industry. We've talked about filmmakers a little bit. So how can organizations not only support and kind of empower more diverse and inclusive and accessible entertainment?
I'd say talk about disabilities. There's so, there's such variety, right? It can be from mental illness, right? A temporary disability, a permanent disability. I hope that one day talking about disabilities can be as common as wearing eyeglasses. That's really all that is. And how we can get there is talking about it, right? I know so many of my friends, especially my male friends, they are not comfortable talking about mental health. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about it, right? Like, hey, are you feeling really anxious right now, right? Is there anything that we can do to lessen your anxiety for your workday, right? Let's have these conversations. They shouldn't happen in a vacuum, or it's not something that's not related to your work life or that's only in your personal life. We show up as ourselves in every room that we walk in. And so we have to bring that authenticity and we just have to talk about it. I know my family in China, right? It's the Chinese culture is we don't talk about difficult subjects, right? So we have never really talked about my disability. In fact, I think I have talked about my disability less with my parents than we have talked about anything else in my life. But it just to say, let's bring it to the table. Like, hey, sometimes I will need these things. Sometimes it'll be a ramp. Sometimes it'll be a couple minutes for me to get ready. Sometimes it's planning ahead, right? Especially say traveling, if you're using a wheelchair, is a nightmare, right? You need so many logistical plans, you need backups, of your backups. Let's talk about that. It shouldn't be on the shoulder of one person. If we can have more discussions about it, the more people will know about it, right? For example, so many wheelchairs get damaged by airlines every day. Let's not make that happen. That is not normal. That is a medical equipment, right? And let's give those, the limelight, to talk about those issues, as opposed to not even bring up disability in conversations, or have some sort of shame or unawareness, like, oh, we did include it, but it was because we didn't know. Hey, say, I don't know much about disability. How can I change that?
Well said. Well done.
I know.
I wanted to add that a way Nalip can help is to educate these companies and educate them in, this is a business. At the end of the day, those companies want to make money. And I don't think they see how valuable a resource the disability community is in that aspect. We make up 26% of the population just in the United States. That's 26% of the population that could be buying tickets to your movie. And there's some, that's 26% of the population that aren't buying tickets to your movie because they're not interested in the subject matter. I mean, there was a film that came out, the Bryan Cranston film, where he played the quadriplegic, the high level quad. And I know so many people that just skipped that movie. I never watched it just because I was upset about the casting choice. Even though I love him as an actor and I love the story because I saw the original, I had no interest in watching that. So we need to showcase those stories and showcase directors that are coming up that are telling their stories, and actors that are doing it, and people behind the scenes. I have my friend John Woodruff is a filmmaker. He came to me with a script that, there's two leads with disabilities. He wants me to play one. And he's the one who actually gave me that statistic that I didn't even know about. And if you want to talk about brass tacks and finances and stuff, there's money to be made there, and there's such a big community that is there to consume that, all that content.
And, we also don't go to the movies alone, right? Oftentimes we go with friends and family, and that's where we can influence the movies that we see, and their purchasing powers too. I know in the height of the pandemic, I just really wanted to get out one day, right? So I just messaged my friends like, hey, do you want to meet up at the beach just for an hour, just so we're not stuck in our house, right, for days and weeks and months on end. So we all just really wanted to take a boat ride. This was in Redondo Beach, California. And the boat was not accessible, but it did have 50 flavors of margaritas, so that's where your priorities, no ramp, but, so that day they lost $200 off the spot because I couldn't get in the boat. So 3 of my friends didn't want to get in the boat without me. That 1 second, they lost $200. What does that look like at scale?
Yeah, I would have tried every flavor of margarita they had too.
I know. I was really excited. I was like, oh, well, this is not the boat that I'm meant to be on today.
Right. Mm. So Hollywood is missing the boat.
Hollywood is missing the boat.
Missing the boat.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We can do with less margarita flavors, but please make sure there's a ramp to the boat.
Exactly.
Like that. That's going to show up as a tweet related to this panel, and people are going to have no idea what we're talking about. Boats, margaritas, and disability access. Yes.
If you make margarita, boat, and Hollywood memes, please tag us.
So just to kind of summarize a little bit, because I really like the collection of what you guys said, because it started, actually, I think, Kaitlyn, what you're saying, when folks simply say, hey, I don't know much about disability, but we can talk it out and we can figure it out from there. And I think that is great, because we were talking about what organizations that Nalip can do. And the thing is, if they don't know about disability, guess what? There are plenty of folks with disabilities. We will help you figure it out and to make it happen. And I know earlier you talked a lot about relating to the idea of accessibility. And I will point out, this is a panel that has closed captioning and ASL. So I guess the thing is, how many events can all the events have, wheelchair access, right? No events, no locations that people can't get to, no boats with 50 margaritas and no ramp, right? And being able to have things like captioning ASL for all sorts of events, because that means people can get in the door, right? filmmaking's a team sport. And half of that teamwork happens, when you're doing the networking, when you are hanging out at the bar or just meeting folks, because when you don't have that, then you aren't able to take that next step. Danny talked about showcasing folks, and I think that's a great point too. Is lifting them up, right? Saying, hey, look, here's this disabled filmmaker of color who's maybe happens to be one of our members who's doing this great thing, and mentioning them and putting them on panels about things more than diversity as well, are all ways to kind of do that. And then I think the last thing that I'm going to mention that I know that you guys said, see, I love summing these up because they're nice little bullet points, which is where you'd said to use and I'm paraphrasing, was use Naleep, and use the organization's power to actually leverage and put pressure on some of these industry players to actually do the work, to make their stuff more accessible, to make their space more accessible, and to just flat out hire. And that's something that organizations like Naleep can do. And I think those were kind of some of the strong messaging that you guys put out. I am going to add one, which is kind of part of that. And I think part of that is the idea of promoting stories, right? You guys have kind of touched on that a little bit. And I guess I'm kind of curious about examples you have of that, ways organizations have done that, and the kinds of stories that you think should be seen. And I love the fact you guys really brought it down to this is dollars. This is money left on the table, right? And that whoever gets there first is going to have a great big advantage. So I'd love just to lean a little bit more, if you can tell me a little bit more about that kind of effort as it relates to stories.
So my story of how I fell in love with visual effects, it kind of really happened by chance, right? So I was an immigrant. We moved from Beijing to St. Louis, Missouri when I was about 9 years old. And, because we had no money at the time, we couldn't afford babysitters or summer camps or anything of that sorts. So the only thing we did, we had a hand-me-down computer that had like a DVD player, right? So, and then we also had our VHS player as well. And so how I was able to pick up English was going to Blockbuster every day. Blockbuster is Netflix in person. It's a tangible Netflix, right? So I used to check out a movie a day, right? That was my little treat, like mainly for me to learn English. That was the original intent, but I just really fell in love with movies just from that experience, right? Doing that every day. I was watching a movie a day before I even understood what they were all saying. But I just really love watching the visuals and the music and everything, cut together. But for me, at that time at Blockbuster, all the movies that were in high demand were these sci-fi movies, right? Your Back to the Futures, your Star Wars. So when I saw that was my main love. And anything is possible when you throw up a green screen, right? You can even be outer space. Space is not even the limit. The limit is whatever you can imagine. But my main question after I learned that, okay, there is such thing as, special effects, and people put all these, miniatures and all these different parts together to make a cohesive story. And then as I went down that research route, I didn't find any women. So my main question growing up was, I hope they can make an exception for me to work in this industry. I hope I'm allowed to work in this industry as a woman. And that's what lack of representation does. It makes you question, are you even allowed to exist? And I really hope for the next generation, they will have a myriad of questions, but not that one.
I love it. I'm so glad I'm not talking after her. Have fun, Danny.
Right. I was like, wow. I actually forgot what I was going to say, but no. Okay. There is a way. I'm just going to say how I got back into acting after my accident and how I knew it was a possibility. First of all, a friend of mine who is non-disabled championed for me to go on an audition, even though she didn't know if I was still acting or not. I hadn't acted in years up to that point, and that's a whole nother story. But I went out for this audition for commercial, and I booked it. And while I was on set, I was looking around and thinking, oh man, this is possible. Like this this can actually happen. Let me give it another shot. And then just randomly, I fell into the Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge that was created by Nick Novicki. And that opened my eyes to the whole disability community and how many amazing, talented actors, producers, writers, directors there are. So companies can just YouTube that and see hundreds of short films of different types of disabilities, some that have nothing to do with disabilities, some that do, funny movies, scary movies, documentaries, musicals, like the whole gamut in just this one film festival that is done every year. And it's out there. I mean, one quick Google search. So we got to stop using the excuses. They have to stop putting blocks in front of them when they're not there. The path is open for them to find these things.
100%. We're all here. We want to see ourselves. We want to be a part of this industry. And it's not just that we have something to offer. And what we have to offer is something amazing. And with that, I think we are about out of time. And so I just want to go. So thank you, Danny, and thank you, Kaitlyn. Thank you for our ASL interpreters and to our captioner. Just real quick, if folks wanted to find you guys, where would they find you?
Go ahead.
Do you have a website or?
Sure. I'm Kaitlyn Young on all social medias. You can also follow my company, which is Alpha Studios, on all social medias. And you can follow along the works that we're doing through 1 in 4, which is 1 in 4 Coalition on social.
So I did something that I'm sure not a lot of people do, but I Googled myself last night.
Oh, no.
So if you just Google Danny J. Gomez, all my stuff will pop up, IMDb, but I do have a website, www.dannyjgomez.com, and you'll find everything. All my socials are on there and some stories and my advocacy work and credits and some fun videos. So check it out. Thank you.
And that's it for our Visibility on and off screen Latinx POC Artists with Disabilities panel. My name is Al-Mohamed, and you can actually find me on Twitter most easily at Al-Mohamed. So DAYALMOHAMED. That's also where you can also find me online on my website. I hope you will check out the rest of the NALEAP Media Summit and check out the hashtag NALEAP Media Summit 2021, because there's going to be a whole lot more right there. Hope you're having a fantastic day, and we'll see you in the future.